All right, welcome everybody to track 4 on the Giants Jukebox. The playlist this year is on shuffle mode, so this is the second to last one that we're doing, even though it's the second course in our official curriculum sequence. I'm sad to say there's only one rollout left, and that's third grade in March. We are glad you guys are here. If you're viewing this live, we'll be sending you sketch information at the end of the sequence in March, so don't freak out if things don't appear in MOEX tomorrow. When we've played all the tracks this year, I will send an email out to everyone reminding them to be on the lookout for that email from MDE. And if you're getting this video after we've recorded, we're glad you found it. We're glad you're viewing the recap. We're sorry you can't get those state clock hours. The goal of these sessions, though, is to give you a bird's eye view of an entire Giants grade level. And while we'll get a little bit into the weeds on some of the activities, overall, we're going to try our best to give you a really good look into that whole grade level overall, while picking out some of the key activities that help showcase what really makes it tick. Tonight, you are only listening to me briefly. You get the much cooler experts of Carol Gershmel and Luann Wilsey, who were the revision authors. So, very quickly, the norms for the evening. You will notice that my camera is going to go off from time to time too. We're all multitasking. We all have to do that from time to time. So take care of your needs as you have them. And that's pretty much my biggest norm for a online presentation. I am the most laid back presenter ever, and I force my co-presenters to adopt that same laid backness. So there we go. In terms of the agenda for the evening, here's what you're in for tonight. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to cover 4 topics, and we're not going to give equal amount of time to all of them. We're really going to be spending the bulk of our time in that second bullet point, where we get into the weeds. And I did not update that particular slide to indicate fourth grade instead of sixth grade from the last rollout. So yes, I reuse my PowerPoint presentations, and you will spend the most time today looking at spatial thinking and literacy and all of that in fourth grade social studies. So, like I said, you're in really good hands. I also wanted to let you know that while you will continue to access Giants from the place that you're currently accessing it, which is probably misocialstudies.org, Giants is now an official MCSS product. So, going forward, the Michigan Council for the Social Studies will be supporting the curriculum. I'm a former president, current secretary, incoming treasurer. I could not be more excited to bring Giants home to a place that makes the most sense. So going forward, too, we're going to partner with a couple of funding sources to do some research on how well Giants prepares students for future success. So stay tuned if you're interested in possibly participating in that. Just let me know. Giants really stemmed out of the Michigan Open Book Project. That was a free digital textbook. And one of the first questions we got when we released things was, great, where's the resource package that goes with it? And we didn't have one because the grant was for the creation of the textbooks and not ancillary materials. But it started with Ottawa ISD picking up the slack, and then it's moved all over the place before finally coming home to MCSS. And like every good curriculum, it is a launch pad. It can be all that you need it to be if you're brand new, or if social studies isn't area that you feel super strong in. You can take it all and do it verbatim. But if you're seasoned, if you're a social studies content guru, you can also just take what makes the most sense and leave the rest of it behind. So that's the beauty of these. You don't have to follow the script. You can go off script. You can supplement with your own activities. You can do everything verbatim. If you've never been to Giants before, misocialstudies.org and clicking on the curriculum and curriculum tab will take you to the bottom of the main page, and there'll be a link to Giants, and it'll look like what you see on your screen. You will be able to hover your mouse over each grade level and choose the individual units and lessons. So that's how you access these. And I know the folks that are on tonight are already using it, so they know how to get it there. And everyone else is probably accessing this video from the place. So I'm going to move on. The pacing view is the old pacing view here, but it should still remain relatively close. You'll notice that in elementary, we don't always fill every week of every school year. That's because of state testing. That's because of attendance issues with snow days. That's for a lot of reasons, including state testing and all that fun stuff. So this can go longer than what you see here, but a good rule of thumb is to just anticipate however many lessons are in a unit, divide the number of weeks on the pacing view by the number of lessons, and you will get the rough estimation of how long you should spend on each giant lesson. And remember that it takes about 3 to 5 years for any teacher to get good with any curriculum. So this year you might be flying by the seat of your pants if it's your first year using it. Next year you're going to feel a little more comfortable, and by the time you log in that third time, it's going to be old hat. You're going to know the Nolan family. You're going to know every activity as they come, and you'll be good to go there. So in terms of the overall story of fourth grade, one thing I like about Carol is that I can never corral her into the same box as the other grade levels. And with fourth grade, we have multiple compelling questions. But this one is actually because the fourth grade content expectations are also a bit of a mess. Fourth grade, when we rewrote the standards, ended up being the dumping ground for everything that didn't fit everywhere else. We wanted to move all Michigan history into third grade. A museum said no, so MDE overruled us in favor of the museum. That's a great reason to have standards, right? But overall, fourth grade ended up being a really weird collection of standards, and Carol and Luann did an incredible job of finding the story that sort of connected a lot of these content expectations. They also let a couple of content expectations go, which is okay because they're covered in other places, but multiple compelling questions for every unit. So the first unit has 3 of them. We're going to look at what people consider when they move to different places. We're going to look at what work looked like in the past and compare it to today. And we're going to look at some ways that families can bring in money. So it's kind of a history economics combination here, which is really neat. Unit 2, and these guys are going to get into more detail with it in just a minute, but Unit 2 has 2 different compelling questions. What parts of Michigan had the most lumbering, and why was lumbering successful in those places? Spoiler alert, Luann and I call Northern Michigan home right now, and that's one of the parts of Michigan that had the most lumbering. So in a lot of cases, I think we had some great local history to contribute to the mix here. And then, as you can see, we switch gears and we start talking about regions of the United States. So from regions of Michigan to regions of the United States. These are the 2 major questions that will drive the second unit. As far as the third unit goes, we get into mining. So there's where some of our Upper Peninsula friends will end up, seeing themselves here. How did mining activities in Michigan benefit people here as well as people in other parts of the U.S.? Again, fourth grade has this weird multiple masters it has to serve of covering Michigan and the larger United States. So I really like what they did here because then they get into how did locations of raw materials affect locations for manufacturing. And that again covers Michigan and different parts of the country. And then finally, in the fourth unit, we get into the automobile industry because, again, all of these stories are short stories that encompass the larger novel narrative of fourth grade social studies. We get into how did automobile manufacturing grow in Michigan in the early 1900s and change in the later 1900s. And then a follow-up to that becomes what results followed auto manufacturing in Michigan. So there are 9 total compelling questions that make up fourth grade. All of them are super cool, and they do a great job of bridging the gap between some of the gaps in the standards themselves, as well as helping create some form of story that Carol and Luann were able to piece together through some incredible historical records that they're going to talk about in just a couple of minutes here. You can choose to use, if you've got an old TCI US Regions book, go ahead and use that if you need a reading source, but you also have Open Book, which is linked in several places. Open Book can be a great ancillary resource that follows in some cases. You'll have to always check the chapters if we're not linking directly, but we cover the same sets of standards, so that's there. But the heart of these units are these big presentations and PowerPoints that really tell the story of fourth grade. And that's my segue into Carol and Luann. And I believe Carol's going first tonight. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to, first of all, welcome all of you again. And special thank you and welcome to Luann and Carol for coming back to do one more of these rollouts. So Carol, Luann, it's over to you guys.
All right.
There we go.
Okay. Grade 4 social studies focuses on historical time periods, but it always includes economics. It very often, you will see, includes geography and also includes civics, especially references to government participating at the time that we're talking about. Unit 1, and we'll focus on that first, was not quite 200 years ago, and we look at the early settlers and especially early farming in Michigan. You'll see that we move on to lumbering and then mining and then automobile manufacturing as we come closer in time to now. In each unit, we tried to make a kind of a bridge between decisions that actual people made in the past and decisions that students and their parents face today. In Unit 1, a family where the father was a farmer, had to make a decision in the 1830s about moving to a new place, buying land when you don't have a whole lot of money. And he'll have other decisions that we look into. But in all of the units, whether we're in farming or come closer in time to the kind of work that people do today, all of the units compare then and now. And we see that change just keeps happening all the time throughout people's lives. In Unit 1, we're going to ask students to read in sort of a different way. Not only will they be reading words, but they'll be reading pictures, timelines, bar graphs, and a lot of this is to compare then the past versus now. We found the most wonderful book written in 1870 by the son of a family that moved to Michigan in the 1830s. And he included drawings of his first house. Thank goodness for the University of Michigan putting this book online so that we'd be able to use it. We are going to look at this family, we're going to look at their farm, and this is a way to compare, a very good way we thought to compare then versus now. The farm that you were looking at from the 1830s looks very different from a farm now. And we asked students to compare what they see about houses and barns and crop fields and trees when they compare the 1830s with 2020. We also ask students to use a timeline where we can compare 1820, which is on the bottom. We put the past on the bottom and we kind of pile everything up like a bunch of blocks or books stacked up to 2020. And just because we start out with farming as one of the first kinds of work that people were doing in Michigan, many people were doing in Michigan, we asked students to make their best guess when do they think most people were employed in farming. And it turns out that 70% of all workers in the US in 1820 were working in farming, in agriculture. Big change coming up to today, 200 years later, we have only 1% of all workers in the US. So you can see why in later units, we are going to talk about other kinds of occupations and ways of earning a living. But this, we also use graph in addition to timeline. And having heard what students just heard, it should make sense that 1820 has the very high bar graph showing more than 70% of all workers in the US employed in farming. And in comparison, when we come over on looking at the bottom to 2020, very, very tiny bar graph. So things really have changed. We also look at how historians geographers, economists, political scientists all have neat ways of looking at what has happened, what is happening, and we try to make sure that we include all of their viewpoints when we write the lessons. Kind of a fun thing that we do often in the first unit is use something that geographers find important, and that is a map. And we use this map to make the point with students that it really is nice to be able to have information, because the task we have here is we have 6 places, A, B, C, D, E, F, and we don't have a whole lot of information, but we're saying, where, if you had to choose among these 6 places, where would you build your town, or where would you put your trading post? And this is kind of building on grade 3, where in grade 3 they talk about fur trading. This is a long time ago. This is not now. And oh golly, it's nice to have more information. Which of these places is located where you have really nice conditions for fur trading? There's lots of animals that bear fur. This would apply earlier in the 1700s, especially in the time of fur trade. Well, it looks like D and E, maybe not C, but several of these places would be great for putting a trading post where people could bring their furs. And then the whole point is that if you make a trading post, you are going to want to sell your furs to the whole rest of the world. And the whole rest of the world is you can get to out of ports on the ocean at X and at Y. Now, I should tell you now that this map shows you a real place. Okay? More information would be really useful. Like, it would be nice to know if place D was connected to a port, or if place C was connected to a port, and it would be really nice to know if this is a place, if C or D or the other places are in areas where you have good farmland, because farm products are something that you could sell to other parts of the world or to other places. It is so nice to have more information. Now, with this information, I'm going to skip ahead, and I'm going to reveal the tricky thing that I did when I first made this map. Can you see what I did? Well, we're going to turn this map, and can you see how where I can now reveal that many of what you thought were rivers are going through the Great Lakes. And place D is Detroit, and place C is Chicago. And look at the wonderful connections that both C and D have with ports, so you can sell your products to the rest of the world or the rest of the US. The conditions around Chicago and the conditions around Detroit, especially the good farming and the connections by rivers to other places, really helped those places to become not just towns, but really big cities in the United States, with successful connections to other parts of the US and other parts of the world. In Unit 1, with that introduction now, we're going to focus on the family, how a family decided to move to Michigan and to build a farm in Michigan. And we use snippets of a story, and we try to make them short, but we always try to pair them with a visual, like a map or a picture, so students can read both their text along with maps and pictures. William is telling the story of his family who came from New York to Michigan. And our next question is, why did the family want to move all the way from New York to Michigan? Well, the story, Mr. Nolan writes that my father was trying to farm 25 acres, and an acre is about the size of a football field. This was in New York, and it was not good land. It was full of rocks and hard to farm, and he just couldn't raise enough crops. So they can discover that from the picture, the father came alone at first to Michigan. And what did he see when he got to an area near Detroit? And I have taken pictures near Dearborn, where he eventually bought his farmland. But you can see, I think, that why the father was happy, that why he thought he had found rich soil that would be good for crops. So we're combining reading the pictures along with reading the text, and kind of understanding why people would uproot and come a great distance. Here's where we can bring in a little bit of civics too. All of this moving could be an actual event that really could take place, because the dad could buy land from what is called the Government Land Office. I took this picture of the marker that showed where the Federal Land Office used to be in Kalamazoo. And it was such a deal. The father, we read, he bought 80 acres of land for $1.25 an acre. Like, wow, that is such a good deal. And it was because the federal government, the US government at the time, back in the 1830s, really wanted to sell land to whoever would buy it. Because there were no taxes back then. That is the only way that the federal government could raise money. That's the only way that the US government could have an army that could defend the people who were living in the United States at the time. I'm going to go on. So what we've shown so far are topics inside a lesson and activities, what students can actually do, what they have to work with. And we are going to continue. I'll just start another PowerPoint soon. We will continue with the Nolan family story, the decisions they made in the 1830s. And I think when we read what is highlighted there in the yellow, we can see that several of those decisions have meaning today. It's like, oh my goodness, they moved to a new place. They change the land that they live on. They have to figure out what they can sell in order to make money. They learn about the importance of neighbors who share, and the Nolans themselves face money difficulties. So I'm going to move on and start this next one. And here we have just a repeat of their decisions. We're continuing with their story. And this is almost 200 years ago. This is in the 1830s. We are not quite to the 2030s, but 200 years ago, there were no cars. You can't just get in a car and drive from New York to Michigan in 2 days. In fact, you didn't even get on a horse and ride to Michigan. or with horse and wagon. What you did, and what I think is kind of surprising, is most people at the time came from the edge of New York, from Buffalo. They got on a steamship, and that steamship traveled 240 miles to Detroit, Michigan. That was the major connection for thousands and thousands of families who moved from the east to Michigan. And if they hadn't moved from the east to Michigan, Michigan wouldn't have become a state because you need people to become a state. Um, this is a kind of strange picture, but in the background, you see Detroit. And the family, after a week and storms on the steamboat and even a fire on the steamboat, they finally made it to Detroit safely. And we have the whole story about the seasickness and the storms and the fire on their steamboat. Um, Steamboat, you can see the smoke coming out of the steamboat. This is partly why you have fires, because they're burning wood or coal in order to make the paddle wheel that drives the steamboat through the water on Lake Erie. Finally, they reached Detroit, which has really different looking houses 200 years ago. But this is kind of what people saw entering Detroit. They get to Detroit and we show it on a map. They get to Detroit, and the father certainly does not want to stay in Detroit because he had already picked out and bought land 9 miles away. The only problem is the father and the son, they had to leave the mom and the little kids back in Detroit because they had to walk from Detroit to along something called the Chicago Road. The yellow arrow was kind of pointing along the Chicago Road. First, they walked from number 1 Detroit to number 2, which was at that time called Dearbornville and is now called Dearborn. And that was along a road that was made of wood. More about that later. And then they walked just on a dirt path through the woods until they got to their new land, which actually was on a creek, which was kind of nice. And fortunately, somebody else already lived next door to them, and they get to a place where somebody will help them. They got to Mr. Pardee's home. He had a log cabin, and Mr. Pardee said, "You can stay with me till you build your own cabin." And the first thing we read, and this is the son writing about what he found after walking 9 miles. Our land was a forest. It wasn't a farm, it was a forest. And the only way they were going to have a farm is if they cut down trees. So that's in the first reading above. How did they cut down trees? You can sort of see here, if you look in the picture, I've highlighted father and son and the father's axe. They had to cut down logs in order to have logs to build their house. The neighbors also did help them to stack up those heavy logs for the house. All of these words that we have in the reading are taken from the 100-page book that the Nolan's son wrote about his experiences. The Nolans, they say in the reading, buying 2 parcels of land took much of our savings. And they had to think of a few ways that what could they sell to bring in money? And I have kind of shortened for this presentation the number of things that they sold, but some of the things that they sold were turnips, and another thing which sounds far more delicious to me is watermelon. And they were so happy they had good crops in this fine, wonderful soil, and they wanted to sell them in Detroit. But you remember how far away Detroit was? It was 9 miles away. So how are they going to carry them to Detroit, 9 miles away? Ah, there's another wonderful neighbor named Mr. Travers, and he had built an ox cart. Apparently, he just really was a good mechanical. He knew how to put together wheels and the cart part of it. And not only did he make it, but he let neighbors use it. So the Nowlin family was able to put a heavy load of their turnips and apples into and turnips and apples and watermelons for various trips so they could carry all of this heavy load to Detroit. And just this isn't, we saw government coming up before with the father, and we have economics, just true, wonderful, clear economics. You grow something that's a good, you transport it, you sell it. How did the crops move? Or how did they move their crops? They moved them. This is another government road. Yes, in Michigan, people complain about roads and they would like government to fix the roads. Well, 200 years ago, the very best road in all of Michigan at the time was called the Chicago Road. The government built it because they wanted to be able to move armies in case there were Indian attacks so that the armies could move quickly to help people. The Chicago Road was made of wood, and there's a kind of nice illustration here. The whole idea is you used logs or wooden boards to cover all the muddy places that happen when you get rain in Michigan. And the only group that could afford to do this, where you could have a road that was free for people, especially with our ox carts and wagons, the only free roads were built by the government, and they were made out of wood. Just to show you how awful it is to have muddy roads, the U.S. Department of Agriculture had this wonderful image of a horse is pulling wagon that is stuck in the mud. That's not snow, that's mud in this picture. So plank roads made out of wood, built, especially the ones built by the government that were free to use, not toll roads, were really helpful. We do face a time in the Nolans' life when bad things happened. And this is, I don't have a lot of experience on a farm, but I put a sad face because what Mr. Nolan writes, in spring, one of the oxen died, and the new cow died too. And they had spent money to buy oxen and cow. Later, the other oxen died, and we were in trouble. Why were they in trouble? They had no way to haul the heavy loads of things that they could produce. And they weren't able to sell things in town anymore. The one good thing, even though the oxen died and the one cow died, they still had one cow left and they had lots of potatoes. Because another thing they grew on their farm, father had decided to grow potatoes. We were able to survive on potatoes and milk for all of our meals. And this is what he actually wrote. Breakfast, milk and potatoes. Dinner, milk and potatoes. Supper, more milk and potatoes. Um, Another thing that I did not write down here, but at this time, they had so little money because they couldn't carry things easily to town, to Detroit to sell them and make money. Um, the youngest kids in the families had no shoes all winter. I just can't imagine that. Uh, we'll go on. There was hope, and I should have put a happy face on here because Father asked if he could trade his work or exchange his work. If he worked for Mr. Pardee next door, Mr. Pardee would let the father use oxen so that he could use them to plow the fields. And we get to read another nice picture. Um, Another neighbor, Mr. Stockman, had young oxen but hadn't learned to pull cooperatively, and father was good at training them, so he got to use them in exchange for trading them. Um, it's like there are helpers, there are neighbors, and there's the notion of exchange, which is an economic notion too. Um, the father and the son got creative. Um, the son said, "Oh my goodness, there are a lot of deer. I have a rifle. Maybe I can shoot them. And as long as we can borrow an ox cart, we can take deer meat, venison to sell in Detroit using an ox cart." Again, they're making money by selling. Um, you remember how they had so many trees? Father thought, my goodness, we have all these trees. We have to cut down trees anyway in order to make more land that we can grow potatoes and corn and watermelons. So father and son cut down 3 cords of wood. Um, a cord, that's a lot of wood because 1 cord is the stack that you see there. Um, Again, they were using a resource, which is a nice condition. Geographers think of trees as a nice condition, a nice resource. They were using a resource in order to make money. Um, and I can switch this over. Uh, Luann Luann is the most wonderful about making ways to review with a timeline that we made interactive so you can drag things into the timeline with the notion of comparing chores that you do today with chores that were done in the past, um, or building models, or looking at the character traits of the wonderful people that we saw in the Nalin story, or even going into cemeteries. So let me, if
Sorry, I stole your screen, Carol. I'm very sorry about that.
that's okay.
And I'm going to steal it again. Um, Carol, I can tell you right now is probably one of the most wonderful and just such a smart woman. She's done most of the work here, and I have tried to give my little 2 cents here and there, and finding different activities that I thought would help with, things that the kids could do. So we did a timeline, so it's all the different things that happen, and the kids have to put it, they can either drag and drop, or you could print these and have them cut and paste. And as you know, cutting and pasting is very messy. So if you have the technology and can do a drag and drop, um, then the answers are here for you, not for your kids. Um, well, they can check them later, obviously. But it's just one of the ways to, using a timeline is always a really good skill to use, and understanding, through all this time, There was a lot of stuff going on. We talk about a mortgage. And that's a big thing that happens. And nowadays, mortgages aren't that big of a deal. Almost everybody has a mortgage. But back in those days, in the 1820s, 1840s, they didn't. So one of the things in Carol's in our story that William wrote is about a mortgage and what it is. And thankfully, the lady who had the mortgage on their farm was a really nice lady and didn't call in the note um, when she could have. So let's see. Let me find my other screen. So doing a timeline. I have then and now having kids thinking about their chores and what chores were back in the day, all the things that, and when we have these in the stories, the different chores that the kids had, and then have them compare about what chores did you have? What chores do you have and how is it different? Mowing the lawn versus plowing a field. Um, Helping, harvest versus helping mom pick the tomatoes out of the garden. Girls do the cooking, the girls and boys both did chores back in those days, and they had to keep everything running. The girls helped out and did the farm chores. It wasn't just girls did this and boys did that. A lot of them they interchanged with whatever needed to be done, the kids helped do. And in one of the stories, they sold eggs and butter. The first cow that they bought, mother bought the cow, and it saved them. They were able to buy and sell and trade, and it kept them alive. What are some different things that people use? If you're cutting, I think about my husband, he cuts wood for our outdoor wood stove, and he doesn't use an axe. He uses a chainsaw. So, and when my kids help, they help haul, but we have the chainsaw to do it. So, an activity for kids to do is to pick a chore that they have to do, or maybe they're not doing chores, but a chore someone else in their family does, something that their mom does, maybe. And then, what was it like in the back back in the day, and how do they work it? Taking out the garbage, is that only once a week? How many times did you do that versus how often they had to deal with garbage back then? So it's just they can make a presentation, they could do a poster. I'm someone who, depending on the group, you all know as teachers, sometimes you can trust them to do the technology piece, and sometimes they really want to do posters, which is fine too. We also, what was one of the other ones? I don't recall. But there are different things there. Um, and it's just a really, really cool story with the Nowlands. I actually did some genealogy research, and one of the activities is about, visiting a cemetery. And cemeteries are their own historical record, and they're very, very cool. And the Nowlands have um, their headstones, gravestones in a cemetery. The Nowlands have they have a street named after them, right, Carol?
Yeah.
I mean, and so they were real people, and I know Carol's has visited where the farm was, and it's not there anymore. But it's just there's a Mr. Pardee, there's the Pardee Street, and it's just really amazing um, to remind the kids these are people that actually lived, and this is how they lived. So we transition, and then Carol, you're going to transition from that to lumbering.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's see. If you, I'll grab this back, I guess.
Yep, I'm out.
Okay. Oh, share. Okay. And I will start it here with Unit 2. I'm sorry, yeah, Unit 2. Unit 2, the first part of Unit 2 focuses on lumbering in Michigan and what parts of Michigan had the most lumbering. Well, that is obvious where David lives. Why was lumbering most successful in those places? We will will see. First off, I take you back to farmers. And this is a graph that goes from 1820 to 2020. And you see the bars going down. And these bars are showing percent of all workers in the US. There are fewer and fewer and fewer, shorter and shorter and shorter bars through time. By the time we get to about 1840, not everybody was farming. People were looking for other kinds of jobs, and jobs in lumbering are one of the kinds of jobs that grew at that time. But they grew in some parts of Michigan, especially between 1860 and 1910. I'm going to show you some things that I took from what we call the Michigan Clickable Map, and we're going to see what part of Michigan had mostly corn growing and what part of Michigan had mostly pine forests. And we give students, in this case, it is important to probably give students a photocopy. And it has the corn symbols on there, but it doesn't have a line around them. And we ask students to trace around all of the corn symbols, the symbols that look alike, so we can see a region. This is a real hands-on way of defining a region. A region is something where you have places that are alike and they're near each other. Now, this is one way to look at regions, but we've had students, here we've traced around the corn symbols, but we've had students also do this way, where they said, well, I see groups, I see little groups. The point is, where is all of this corn growing mostly happening? And it's in the southern part of Michigan. And it's important that they write that down. In contrast, we have symbols that show pine trees, and the really important pine trees among the pine trees were the white pine trees. We'll get at that pretty soon. But again, probably on a photocopy, it would be really helpful. Students can trace around the outside of what they think is a group of symbols that are close together and that are alike. And this pine tree region is slightly different than the corn region. Photos show that we use photos to show there are many kinds of jobs. The point is that not all jobs in lumbering were in the forests. A lot of jobs happened in what were called sawmills. And notice those stacks of boards in the bottom photo? That's really important. This is, again, an economic point. That those boards were something that many people outside of Michigan and inside, but especially outside of Michigan, wanted to buy. What did sawmills produce? Pine boards. I tried to take a photo of some of my husband's pine boards. What's so good about pine boards? White pine boards were called, and the white pine tree was called green gold. It made lots of money for Michigan. White builders think white pine, those white pine boards are wonderful because this kind of pine is called a softer wood. It's easy to pound into, it's easy to saw. I suppose not all of our students have been able to saw something, but it is important to know the difference between being able to saw something soft and saw something hard. Do you remember that the Nolan family wanted to sell products? Well, Michigan sawmills really wanted to sell products, and I have an arrow growing from Michigan to Chicago. There was a huge market in Chicago for the lumber that came out of northern Michigan saw pine forests. This is a historic bird's eye view of Grand Haven, Michigan, which is next to Lake Michigan. It shows the smoke coming out of the sawmill. And you know those, you can see those little black things that are floating in the water next to the sawmills. I've circled the sawmill in red. Those are all logs floating in the water. They've been floated from up north down to Grand Haven in river. And the sawmill will make boards out of them. And then can you see both the steamships and the sailing ships? They will carry, especially from Grand Haven, they will carry that lumber to Chicago. Also, actually, the most sawmills and the most money making lumber boards happened in Muskegon and in Saginaw, and Saginaw shipped and they were able to have successful sawmills there, many of them, because rivers connected from the pine trees to Muskegon, or rivers connected the pine trees to Saginaw. The logs would float down to the sawmills. But then each of these ports on a Great Lake, Muskegon would send lumber to Chicago on sailing ships. Saginaw would send lumber all the way to New York City and the big cities on the East Coast. There were results of cutting down trees in Michigan. There was a tremendous amount of cutting, and I should say here, and we do show, there was not replanting. The trees were cut down. Great big fires came through the brush that was left. There were some positive results, selling, and there were some negative results. And we have ways for students to talk about that. One way is a sheet where the artist made one pine tree left among all of these stumps. And is that a problem? And students look into that. Another kind of result was who came to work in lumbering, especially during this time period. And we look at foreign-born in Michigan, and we have many, many, many countries graphed here. But I'm wondering if the students can guess, and we will reveal, which two countries did immigrants come from that have the highest bars? That was Canada, a neighbor next door, and Germany farther away in another continent. Students also have a chance here to investigate their ancestry. Now, we've been looking only at Michigan, but we will look at the whole U.S. The whole U.S., you will see, was important to Michigan. The whole U.S. could be buyers for what was produced in Michigan, for example. We'll look at regions of the U.S. and see how they differ. We start out really easily with finding a simple region. What are all of the states that touch a Great Lake? And we can draw a red line around them to show the region of Great Lakes states, where you have places that are alike and near each other. Comparing regions of the US, we look at where is a region, what part of the US has more mountains, higher mountains, so that, which is kind of interesting. It's like, does Michigan have mountains? Well, a little bit. They're not high like the ones in the West. And then we look at what parts of the United States get more or less precipitation. What part of the United States is wetter and what part is drier? And you'll see why we ask a question like that pretty soon. I have a simple set of data about where are the drier places. There are places here in the West that in an entire year get 8 inches of rain. Whereas close to Michigan in Chicago gets about 36 inches. In southern Nevada near Arizona, that place, Las Vegas, gets 4 inches of rain in the entire year, and that's all. And does this matter? Well, first we're going to summarize this map, and then we'll see that it matters. It looks like several places here have higher amounts, 42 inches, 66 inches near the Gulf of Mexico, 57 inches near the Gulf of Mexico, again, near Lake Michigan, less, but still 36 inches. And we can now color, if we can find all of the parts of the United States that get more than 24 inches of rain. And what do we find? It's almost like the United States is in two halves. We have a wetter east, we have a drier middle with a little bit out here by the next to the Pacific Ocean that is wetter. Drier, and wetter. Why does that matter? Because I need to show you this. This map shows all the big cities and tiny towns in the United States. And which part, the wetter east or the drier middle, do we see more towns and big cities? Aha, the wetter east. That's going to be important if you live in Michigan and you'd hope to sell things to the other part of the United States. Well, maybe the people out here in the drier middle would like to have your wood because they don't have very many trees. It's too dry for trees in many places out there. We also look at temperature, and pretty soon I'm going to explain why we look at temperature. Here, using a little bit easier to work with data, if a circle is bigger, the annual average temperature is warmer. If that circle is bigger and darker, and I've drawn a region line around the warmer part of the United States. And why do I show you this? Because one reason is that cotton can be grown in this exact region in the warmer part of the United States. You cannot grow cotton in Michigan. It's just impossible. We don't have enough warm temperatures for the cotton plant to be able to make all of this wonderful fuzzy cotton. Why am I showing you about cotton? Because I also wanted to show you a map about slave states. No slavery was allowed in Michigan. It's in the Michigan Constitution. You cannot have slavery in Michigan. In fact, during the Civil War later on, 90,000 men from Michigan went to fight against the slave states who had left the United States and wanted to be their own country. And there is a large chunk of what are called the slave states, and these were slave territories out here where it's warmer. There's a large chunk of them where cotton grows best. Why do we talk about slavery? Because one of the interesting GLICS standards for fourth grade includes a content standard that we're supposed to explain the meaning and the purpose of the Underground Railroad. And therefore, we have included the option of seeing lessons about the lives of enslaved people so that students could quickly understand a reason why somebody might want to escape slavery and come to Michigan and eventually go to Canada, where they'd be even more safe than in Michigan. As some review activities for these regions of the United States, teachers have worked out ways to make three-dimensional maps where we use yarn for rivers and pasta or candy for mountains and cotton balls for the warm region and candy corn for the part of the United States where corn grows. And I'm going to stop here, but we have these wonderful clickable maps because Dave and my husband worked together to make layers. You can turn them on to see mountains one at a time. You can turn them on to see population dots one at a time. So they're a great way to review. And let me get out of this.
I love the clickable maps. They are really good. The kids really love playing with the maps and then answering questions.
Okay. So we've talked about farming and early settlement, but we're having fewer and fewer farmers and people find other jobs, for example, in lumbering, which included working in sawmills. And we're going to now look at other kinds of work that people found in Michigan, and this is in the late 1800s. We had seen, and I wanted to show you just a little bit more. This is the amazing Michigan clickable map that Dave and my husband Phil have worked on. It can be blank, or there are buttons over on this side, and you can choose to turn on buttons. I really like the population dots button. This is like, no, we can't put 9 million dots on there. We just can't. So what we do is we say a dot represents 10,000 people. Now that's a lot of people. But that way you can show, wow, there's a lot of people near Detroit, in Detroit and oh my goodness, there's a lot of people in Grand Rapids. So you get where the bigger cities are, you get more dots. And we do have people living in the UP. One dot represents 10,000, but you can see that the UP, the Upper Peninsula, just doesn't have as many people. Whereas where farming started out here in the southern part, you have a lot of people. And I'm hoping that this is something that will jump out at the students. It's kind of interesting to compare the population map, and students can turn on population. They can turn it off. They can turn on pine forests and corn growing land together. It's a neat comparison to say which region, the pine region or the corn growing region, seems to have more people right
Hey,
now.
Carol.
Yeah.
Can I take us off script for a minute and share my screen for just a moment? Because this past summer, Phil and I created a great extension to this that's up on my screen now. So this is like the clickable maps, only in this particular case, students take their knowledge that they've learned from the Giants units and they're able to actually apply it. So their job is they're farmers and their goal is to make as much money as
Oh,
possible
yes.
with
Yeah,
these
yeah.
crops. And so each one of these is a token that they can drag and drop somewhere on the map. And you can see, oh, if I'm growing cherries up here, I can make $8. Wonder what asparagus would get me. Oh, 3. I better go back to cherries. So this is kind of a logical extension that comes from that Phil and I put together this past summer that goes very nicely with third and fourth grade. And if you really want to give the kids a challenge, you leave the map like this. If you want to take pity on them, you can at least put up what the growing seasons are, what the soil quality is, and they can overlay that on top of the map as well. But that was something Phil and I put together. I'm starting to resurrect some of his old director files that in some cases are from the 80s and 90s that don't work on modern machines anymore, but I'm getting them to work in the web by completely reprogramming them from the ground up between my coding knowledge, artificial intelligence, and Phil standing on the sidelines going, no, not that. We're resurrecting a lot of really great stuff. So that's something new in the fourth grade Giants units that you can use this year. And with that, back to you, Carol. You can share your screen again.
Okay.
Or you are sharing. You are sharing. It looks
Okay.
like yep, there you go.
All right. So, just another anecdote. Like, this was 7 years ago, and we had Grand Haven fourth graders demonstrating the Michigan clickable map to the school board. And they went way over time because they're allotted 10 minutes because the school board members were so interested in using the clickable. It was fun. I am next going to turn on a button showing metal ores. Where are metal ores? That means iron, copper. Where are they in Michigan? And you may know, but I don't know if your students know. I don't know why I have that. Okay. Because our lesson 1 of Unit 3 focuses on mining of copper and iron, and we're going to see where it was mined. It's the UP. It's like we got the best bargain in the whole world when Congress decided that it would give part of southern Michigan to Ohio, but it would give Michigan all of this wonderful part of Michigan. It has copper, it has iron, and it even has some gold. And I am told that nowadays it also has what are called rare earths, those metals that are needed in order to make batteries and cell phones and wonderful modern stuff like that. Metals in Michigan is our topic. We ask students to think about all the things in their basement, in their garage, in their kitchen, in their rooms that are made of iron and steel, for example. But we also take them back to the Nowlins. Remember how the Nowlin mother, she didn't have a fancy house like we have today. She burned wood in a fireplace in order to do her cooking, to bake her bread. I think that this device over here might have been an easier way for her to bake her bread. She had to burn wood or maybe coal in a fireplace. And you had to have metal pots, you had to have metal grates in order to accomplish your cooking. Things got a little bit fancier. And I wanted to show you, this is roughly the 1880s. And instead of having fireplaces, we now have stoves made of iron. Oh my goodness, they must have been heavy. Doesn't that look heavy? Why I show you this is families could cook. They would put wood or coal or even corn cobs like my aunts and uncles did. They would put that in the bottom here, light it on fire, make heat, and put their metal pots and pans on top of their metal iron stove. And the important thing to notice here, this is an iron stove made in Michigan in Detroit at the Detroit Stove Works. And I photographed this about a year ago when I was driving illinois Illinois and stopped at a museum. This was an old stove that had gone from Detroit over to Illinois. But remember the name, the Detroit Stove Works. People use copper, and yeah, they can make beautiful copper pots. But what's really important was in the late 1800s, the telephone was invented. People were having electric lights and needed to move electricity around. And you can only move electricity or have the telephone work or the telegraph work. All those electrons moved on copper wires. This does not look like copper wires. Copper is little bits of an element. In this case, it looked orange in one of these rocks. It's embedded with all sorts of other rocky stuff. Here, the copper looks kind of greenish. And if you want to get this metal so that you can use it for pots or for stoves, you have to get it out of the ground. And these are the men who went down into underground mines, who dug copper out of the ground. Sometimes it was only a couple 100 feet deep. Eventually they went deeper and deeper. They were 1,000 feet deep underground. Can you see that it's not only men up here, but boys, younger workers? This is the strangest kind of elevator. In order to go deep underground into tunnels, they had to kind of ride the strangest elevator you can imagine. It went down on a slant and they were sitting on seats. I guess it's like riding a bus downward or an escalator downward. They went deep underground. That big building is the only thing you'd never know. There were miles and miles of tunnels underground, but this had the machinery to pull the men up and down and the copper ore up and down. I think these were kind of dangerous jobs. I hope that students can see in the picture that the men are making a hole by pounding a sharp, pointy drill into the rock. And the whole point of putting a hole in the rock is they're going to put exploding powder, and then they're going to light that powder and have an explosion and blow that face of the tunnel. They're going to blow that all into smaller pieces and take it up to the top above ground. The tunnels were held. Can you see those tree trunks that were holding up the tunnels? This is a big deal. These are big tree trunks holding up the roof of the tunnel. It doesn't look like an exactly, I couldn't do the job, sorry. This man is pushing the cart that contains chunks of rock that contain copper. And my question is, who was doing this? Oh my goodness. Well, this map reveals who was doing this. And can you see how here's the lower peninsula of Michigan, and here's the upper peninsula of Michigan in the blue box. And notice how it looks really dark. That dark color means that 34% or more of the population was foreign born. People came, 1/3 of the people at the time in 1900 who lived in the UP had been born in another country and were working in jobs like mining or lumbering, because we know that there were also trees up there. So who was working the mines? Foreign born. There were above ground jobs. I'm just showing the building because it's so impressive. These were called smelter buildings. They had hot furnaces that heated the copper ore, which was a mixture of pure copper, but it was all stuck together with other rock. They heated that to 2,300 degrees in order to make the copper melt and float to the top. And then you had pure copper. Somebody put a lot of money into building these smelters. Somebody put a lot of money into having ships that are going to take this. These are now, look at these men have bars of pure copper that are now going to go to another part of the US to be manufactured. And that one of those main parts of the US that these went to was Detroit. But it's like, who had the money to build the mines, to build the smelters? And this is such a revealing. There was the major company up here in the UP was called the Pittsburgh and Boston Mining Company. They are the men who invested the money to build the tunnels, to pay the workers, to build the smelters, and then to ship the pure copper to be used in manufacturing wire and pots and things like that in other parts of the United States. Big bucks came from other parts of the United States. Michigan is not alone. And that's a good reason why in 4th grade they want us to talk about both Michigan and the United States. That money is from Boston and Pittsburgh to get this all started and to keep it going. We next can look at, okay, I haven't talked about iron mining, but lots of iron has also been mined in the UP, and the iron ore and the copper were used in manufacturing goods that could be sold to the rest of the United States. And here's where we have a complete appreciation for the Great Lakes, because this ore, you can imagine those bars of copper were really heavy, or iron ore is really heavy. What the mining companies did up here next to Lake Superior in the UP, in the mines, from the mines, they sent ships through the connection between Lake Superior and Lake Huron, and one of their first stops was in Detroit, but other stops could be anywhere along a Great Lake. And I'm going to show you what happened in Detroit, or examples of what happened. How did Detroit companies use Upper Peninsula metal ores? A way bigger smelter than any in the Upper Peninsula was on the Detroit River. And you can see the buildings and the smokestacks here. And the point is, this is on the Detroit River, which connects Great Lakes. This is the Detroit and Lake Superior Copper Company that built the copper smelters here in Detroit. Now, notice the name on this building. And this is a case where we're asking students to kind of read the picture too. We see it says Detroit Stove Works. Remember we saw that Detroit stove earlier? Wonderful, wonderful huge ships that are going to carry away for sale in the other parts of the United States a tremendous number of iron stoves. Detroit Stove Works sold more iron stoves than any other company in the United States. There were even railroads hauling things into the stove works. What they did was take blocks of iron, pure iron, just like we were seeing that they wanted blocks of pure copper, blocks of pure iron. They poured it into molds and made the parts of the stove and put the stove together. Some other big, heavy, expensive products were all of the iron that is, that is in this railroad car. Detroit used Michigan iron to buy railroad cars, to build railroad cars, to make the wheels, especially for railroad cars. And these were sold and used throughout the entire United States. I do need to say that there was a place up in the UP. It's the most wonderful place to visit. It's called Fayette, Michigan. It is close to Lake Michigan rather than being close to Lake Superior. It had furnaces that melted iron ore. It made iron bars. It had 3 ingredients for the iron bars. It used iron ore. It used charcoal or wood from trees that look kind of like charcoal that we see today, and it used limestone. All of those things were nearby. The problem is, see how it had wood nearby in this picture? They cut down so many trees to make charcoal, they couldn't run the furnaces anymore. So after after a long time of success, they stopped, and most of this kind of manufacturing was happening in Detroit or Chicago or bigger cities on the lower Great Lakes. There was the most fantastic in videos way to see something like iron produced is to look at videos about blast furnaces. They just sound terrific, and this is what one looks like. This was the better technology that was developed with big, hot furnaces, and most of this technology was being used in Detroit or Chicago or Pittsburgh, all places near the Great Lakes. And we do have to remember that in order to make steel, which is very important to us, we have 3 ingredients: limestone, iron ore, and coal. The coal is to do the heating, to melt the iron ore. And these are all very heavy things. You'll see in this photo that we are next to a Great Lake. The piles are next to the Great Lake. Why? Because they're hauled by huge ships. That's the most economical, low-cost, cheap way to haul heavy raw materials, is to put them in a boat and unload them next to the Great Lake or the river that is next to the Great Lake. This is just a reality of, right now, the United States would like to manufacture steel. Steel is such a valuable product. The thing is, we have to think about how we bring together the raw materials and then what we do with them. There are amazing videos where you can look at blast furnaces, at things being manufactured in steel factories. Um, we have activities, just there's an amazing video about one of the ships that carried ore on Lake Superior. It was coming toward Detroit. It was called the Edmund Fitzgerald, and it is really a heartwarming. I think it was, oh God, was it 50 years ago? Yeah,
I think it was 51, and
50.
there has never been another shipwreck like that since then. That was the last one in Michigan.
Um, and uh, w- uh, there are many ways to review with videos, with thinking about pros and cons. It's like, oh my goodness, what was a good thing about working in farming or lumbering or mining and manufacturing? What was kind of a problem with working in each one of those? Um, also, Luann suggested that it would be really nice to, if possible, to see was there manufacturing done in the past in my local area or in a nearby town or city, or could you interview somebody who worked in a factory? Because manufacturing has been tremendously important in the history of Michigan and the lives of people in Michigan. And so, let's see, how am I doing? Oh, I'm almost on time. Okay. I'm going to start Unit 4, the last unit, which is another kind of manufacturing. And let's see if I can find it here. Ah, automobile. It's really tricky to put a whole year into make it short, but we're
You're
trying.
doing great, Carol. You're doing great.
Okie doke.
Sorry I'm not much more help.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Gotta start it this way. Uh, Unit 4 is first, it's about the beginnings of the automobile industry and how it started. It grew, it had some problems, but it's also about recent. Oh, geez, I got a doorbell ringing. Um, well, we'll see. Oh, okay. Um, So we're going to look at automobile manufacturing. We've tried to use that timeline again, going from the 1830s at the bottom till now at the top. Um, we it's a little bit of a review. We ask students to put their birth year on the timeline, when they think the Nowlin family was on the timeline, and when they think the earliest automobiles were invented. And here's the reveal. Um, the earliest automobiles were about 60, yeah, about 60 years after the Nolans. Um, and of course, that's quite a distance from when the typical fourth grader may have been born. In between, we had Michigan auto companies, especially the ones in Detroit, having just the most success ever. We had a world war, and then we had Detroit auto companies facing competition. So we're going to see some change in time through time as we talk about automobiles. I just wanted to remind the students that we haven't always had cars. Remember the Nolans? How the Nolans were using an ox cart, and they thought that was wonderful and absolutely necessary. Um, and we had other people who are more dressed up and who are out with their carriage and two horses. Um, and it's kind of, we do ask, how do you change from the muscle power of oxen and the muscle power of horses to something called engine power. And how do you end up with a horseless carriage? You know, that wagon kind of looks like that wagon, except there's something, it's pretty small, but there's an engine on this one. There's no horses. Um, and I found the most wonderful, and I know it looks a little confusing, but this is what made it possible to not have to use horses anymore. And this is a gasoline engine. This is a simplified diagram of a gasoline engine. And I never had shop class, and I have not the foggiest how a car is made or how to repair it. But it just strikes me that a gasoline engine has an explosion happening here near the top. And it's pushing on this thing, which makes things turn. Well, this thing that is turning is going to make wheels turn if you're a really smart inventor and you can figure it out. And that's what the automobile inventors did. It's like a little explosion makes things turn. Now, the very first automobile with that little tiny engine on the back that's going to make those wheels turn, it was invented when a gasoline engine got connected to the wheels of a cart. And Carl Benz, who the Mercedes-Benz is named after, invented this in Germany. And then lots of other people said, oh, this is cool. I'm going to do this too. But they had to figure it out themselves. The people who did the first really successful, and I'm making a long story short, automobile companies, the ones that lasted more than a couple years, it's very interesting. In the United States, they were near the Great Lakes, or they were near the Atlantic Ocean. And it's like we kind of wonder, why did Michigan turn out to be the very best place for manufacturing cars by about 1920? And I'm going to show you one of the reasons. Well, yes, Michigan does have a central location. So if you can make something, you can reach a lot of people in this high population eastern part of the United States. Michigan had the wonderful resources, the iron for making the strength of the car. Michigan had experience. People had figured out earlier how to use a gasoline engine in a boat on the Great Lakes, in ships or smaller boats on the Great Lakes. But what I want to focus on is wealthy investors. Automobile companies in Michigan, where they turned out to be highly successful, got help from investors. It just took Mr. Ford or Mr. Olds or Mr. Dodge. It took them a while to do the inventing, and they needed to buy the materials so they could do their inventing. They needed investors. And who invested in early automobile companies in Michigan? Copper mine owners, copper smelter owners. The owner, remember the Detroit Stove Works? That company invested. They essentially gave money to inventors like Mr. Ford, so that he could build a successful automobile. And the place that made wheels for train cars, they invested. This was Michigan investing in Michigan. And oh my goodness, that investment paid off. they got their money back because the big three automobile companies, which were Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, by 1940, that's 5 years before I was born, the big three automobile companies in Detroit produced 90% of all cars that were owned in the United States. My goodness, that's a lot of buyers. No, they weren't. It's like they weren't buying people in the United States in 1940. They were not buying cars from any other parts of the world, really. They were buying them from Detroit. And it's partly because the automobile companies made some good decisions. One important decision was, should they buy a car that didn't go very fast or didn't look very speedy, or should they buy a car that could go really fast? Well, Mr. Ford chose not to make the large or the fast or the fancy. He chose to make a sturdy car, a low-cost car that people could buy, but you could always depend on it that it would work well. He and the other companies had to put Mr. Ford, for his very successful Model T, had to put together 10,000 parts. And you see some of the bigger parts at the museum in Dearborn. And they made a tremendously important decision, and that was to use something called an assembly line. And just to show you the why that mattered, making a Model T, to make one car took 12 and a half hours before they figured out the assembly line. And by 1923, it took 1.5 hours to put 10,000 parts together for a car, to get it all built looking like a car. The price, because they used an assembly line and could do it faster, dropped from $850 to $260. This was just an amazing invention. But there is a kicker. It's like, okay, what do you see in this photo of an assembly line? And one thing that I'd like to point out in the picture, and kind of in the circle here, this worker stays standing at this workplace called his station, and he does the same thing over and over. And then after he puts his particular part into the correct place, the whole thing moves on a conveyor belt to have something else done. So you have workers who stay put, and you have pieces that move on to get more and more put together. And let me see if I can jump out to something that Dave made for me. And it's just, oh my goodness, what did working look like in an old factory? Oops, you can't see that, can you? Oh, shoot. Can you see it now?
Now I can.
Yes, we do.
Yep.
You see what that guy is doing? He's at his station doing his job. And he does the same thing over and over. And it's like, were these ladies, or no, I guess they're men. That's their job. They stand there, something comes to them, and they do it over and over again. We have other videos that you can look at to show in contrast, you can see what is being done in factories today, like in a Toyota factory. The amazing combination of workers staying at one place, doing things to put a car together, along with the help of robots. And I'll come back to that if we have time at the end. Okay? All right, let's see if I can go on here. So we have you can jump out. We have listed in the lessons where you can find videos and video clips. Dave has been shortening videos because it's kind of hard when something is 15 minutes long and you only want to look at 1 minute. So bless his heart. We have the possibility of students planning and their own assembly line. They could assemble a fabulous pizza. They could assemble a greeting card. They could assemble a toy. They could plan it out. The thing is basically a student has to do something at one station and pass the thing that he's working on to the next person to have it done at the other station. So that's basically the rules for doing that. What I want to get to, because we're getting late, is automobile companies ran into trouble, especially sometimes getting buyers. One of the problems they ran into in about 1970 was that the gasoline, the oil that we get gasoline from, came mainly from the Middle East, and the Middle Eastern countries were upset with the United States and said, we're not going to sell you any. That was a huge shock. The problem was that back in the 1950s and 60s in the United States, there were these amazing big heavy cars. They were called gas guzzlers. They used a lot of gasoline to move the heavy weight around. During the oil crisis in 1973, people started buying smaller cars like this little Beetle. It's much smaller than even an old Model T. Or they started buying Toyotas from Japan. Oh, this was not a good time. In Detroit, another kind of problem that Detroit had was that factory workers wanted to be paid more, wanted to have different working conditions. They demanded that they be allowed to have unions that could bargain with companies. I am running out of time. The amazing thing, look at the population of Michigan. It went from barely thousands to more thousands with the Nolans and horses and oxen back here. And it kind of grew, and the bars for each year get a little bit higher. And then there's this steep climb that happens when you get auto manufacturing in Detroit, especially. And this steep climb up until after about the 1970s, and then Detroit had competition from the rest of the world. We have this steep, if we look only at Detroit and its nearby suburbs, we have this steep climb in population. And then after 1970, we don't have very much growth. It's just kind of leveled off. Where did workers come from? Workers came from the southeastern United States, especially African Americans, to work. Workers have come to Michigan from other parts of the world. Right now, Mexico, Canada, India, China, and Iraq, they're the top 5 countries of immigrants who have come to work in Michigan. Detroit still has a lot of assembly plants. I think Michigan has more than any other state. The thing is that several other companies, and anything that's a square is a, a, an automobile a company from another country who has assembly plants in the United States. How does Michigan compare? Oops, I'll go back just one more, sorry. Michigan, of all the states in the United States, Michigan still has the most workers, close to 50,000 manufacturing vehicles. Michigan has the most people, more than 100,000 manufacturing parts. So Michigan still is important in manufacturing automobiles, but if you look at the whole world, in 2023, China produced 30 million cars, motor vehicles. The US produced 11 million. So there is competition. And can I turn this over to Luann?
Okay. We civics in government, doesn't really fall in fourth grade in a very nice place. So what I did is we put a lot of government and we put a lot of economics where they were as best we could with the Nowlands, and with lumbering and mining in the big three, auto manufacturing. But there's lots of stuff that fourth grade requires, especially going into fifth grade, when it comes to the government. So, this is still a work in progress. I'm sorry that I didn't get it finished. But we talk about civics and what it is, the rights and duties of citizens and their responsibilities, what a government is, what the United States is, that we're a republic. We have a constitution that was ratified, and the the preamble is very, very important, and we still look at it today just as what is our government supposed to do? And it's the big thing that and I break it down so that the kids can see what each part of the preamble says. And then the branches of government that we have is the federal government. And then we talk about I love Schoolhouse Rock. Schoolhouse Rock has great videos on the three ring circus is the three branches of government. I'm just a bill, how a bill becomes a law. No More Kings actually backs up to the Revolutionary War and why we wanted our country the way it was. And I grew up with Schoolhouse Rock. As a former fifth grade teacher, this graph is something that has been on the fifth grade M-Step. Kids have to drag and drop and put, which branch does what, who's in charge of it. So I put it here in fourth. There is a drag and drop that they can do as an activity, so they can practice it. And I had that. We practiced it in fifth grade too. So we talk about the levels of government. Remember the Nowland family when they first got to Michigan and how they were paid. That's part of the story we didn't talk about, but how the government collects taxes, how they were creating the Chicago Road, which later became I-94, how the government deals with other countries, with trade and protecting us, how the state government is set up. It's very, very similar to our federal government. Michigan does have its own constitution. We have our own, our executive branch isn't the president, but it's the governor, and they make laws just for the state. They take taxes so that the infrastructure is set up, helps fund schools, licenses, all of those things. And then our local government, what are the things that they do? And Carol and I were talking about, our local government and how our little Blaine Township had changed some things to keep the windmills out of our little spot here in Michigan. And we've talked about maybe doing some constructive criticisms or doing some public discourse. Was that a wrong thing to do? Was it protecting the people, or was it keeping people from businesses coming in and doing something good for our little slice of the world. I haven't finished the Bill of Rights. I haven't finished um, those things. Unfortunately, I have my fifth grade hat on when I was doing this, so I was making it more in depth than it needed to be. So, but I need to do checks and balances, separation of powers, because those are all fourth grade GLIC. So those will be added to the civics at the end. And as always, when I'm working with Carol, I always have these really fiery things that come up, and I've been writing notes down in my phone about, like when she was pointing out how there were boys going in the mines, we don't let boys do stuff like that. We don't let kids do that. Why? The government is protecting the kids. And then we can talk about child labor laws and things like that and just little bitty nuggets. But is child labor law fourth grade GLIC? No. But it's just ways of bringing in government or economics so that they can't, the kids can see that it's everywhere in everything that we do. So almost every part of our lives. I am done.
Dave can take the
My
screen.
30 seconds of the entire 2 hours is done. Thank you,
Well-
Carol, for taking the lead on this and being so wonderful to work with. I really appreciate it.
Well, and you have been instrumental behind the scenes working on some of these things, and you guys took 2 years to rebuild these units. The Nowlin family was really a rabbit hole you guys went down, and I'm glad that you did because it really helped make all of these units sing. So we appreciate that. Really quickly, just wanted to make a nod toward assessments. So most of the other grade levels have some assessments that we've kind of developed to go along with them. We don't have that for fourth grade right now, but we also sort of do. I mean, there's a ton of activities in here that every assessment that you give does not have to be an A, B, C, D multiple choice style test. So almost any of the activities that come towards the end of a lesson could also make a really good overall assessment. And when it comes right down to it, I mean, social studies has the word social right there in the title. And you don't always have to give them that opportunity to sit in rows and be super quiet. Like they should be talking, they should be active. So the inquiry questions themselves that guide each lesson are in themselves a assessment as well. You can have some great links to your writing block with that too as they try to answer it. All of them are argumentative or persuasive in nature. So we've got those. And I will be developing some out of all the other projects that have come across the pipeline over the days, but really wanted to make sure that the units were finished up and where we wanted them first before we tackled that assessment piece. So stay tuned on that front, but also remember this is your opportunity to let kids test without that test setting. I mean, we talk about how much kids are tested right now. It's insane. And with the dyslexia law coming down the pike in a couple of years, it's going to get even worse. So like this can also be an opportunity where you can take that compelling question or you can take some of those closing activities and just use that as the assessment because really, truly, that's going to tell you more than a multiple choice test. So stay tuned on that front. But with that, we have a couple of minutes left for anyone who would like to ask either Carol or Luann some questions. These are the horse's mouth in this particular case because they were the writers. I said mouth, so that's they were the people who put their blood, sweat, and tears into this. So I know Bobby and Lisa, you guys have been using these over in Jefferson. Do you have any questions directly for them?
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys go home. You guys have been in school all day, so we appreciate your time and attention tonight, and we will. You know how to reach out. You know how to get hold of me. So have a good rest of your week.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.